All right, this is the beginning of our mosaic that we'll be creating. Our first step is to come up with a plan and a design. Our mosaics are going to be on hardboard like this one, and this 12 by 12 size. And so you're going to have paper over there to come up with some sort of a design plan. Think of some things that you'd like to create a complete design, and we're going to begin by making some of the pieces in our mosaic. So here I've come up with a full design of what I have planned, and then I'm going to use some of my other tiles to create a fill-in for the design. So my first step will be to come up with a plan, come up with the pieces that you're going to create out of clay. These are the pieces that I created. We're going to roll them out, create them from clay, glaze them, and then begin to put these pieces all together. Also, you may want to peruse some of the things that I will have available. I'll have small tiles like this that will be available. I will have regular tiles like this that we can use and cut and change. Also, I have broken pottery and things like that that we can utilize, and we'll learn how to cut that, as well as small things like this. Other little items also can be put into this process. If you have some shells, I incorporated some shells, some other little doodads. If you think you have something at home that you would incorporate in the design, we will utilize those. I have some other little mosaic tile shapes that we'll also be utilizing. But I do want you to create some sort of design that's unique and original. If you see something out there that you really like, I do like you to come up with something original design that is unique to you. So think of your plan, start to draw it out, and then we'll roll out the clay and create our tile pieces. All right, we are moving on to the next step. You're going to create your design and your plan, figuring out what you're doing here, and you're going to roll out some clay. Wedge up a piece of clay, make sure it's nice and consistent, and you're going to take your rolling pin and your stilts and roll out a nice thin piece of clay. Keep in mind that the other tiles will be kind of thin, so you want this clay here to be maybe 1/4 of an inch. It can even be thinner if you'd like. It's kind of your preference. My tiles were about 1/4 of an inch. They are raised up a little higher than the other tiles, but that was fine with me. You kind of decide what your preference is. If you need it a little bit thinner and you need to roll it out, you can also kind of stretch it by slapping it down at an angle on your table there. That will stretch it evenly. And then take your roller back to it. Make it nice and smooth. All right, now you can, from here, put your pattern on there and press through your paper right onto the clay to leave that impression right on the clay. Once you've got your designs, several things that you might have there, you can kind of see that. Now I'll have some other things available. Like here, I'm going to cut this piece out. I might even use my clay tools or texture tools to create some bark into it by just carving right into the clay. And cut that out like so. Now, I'll also have some other options for you available. I do have things like cookie cutters and things that have stamps and things like that. So if you want to utilize those, I do have a small set of small ones that have leaves, and I might incorporate some other things into my mosaic. So once you've got these cut out, you're going to lay them on one of the wear boards, the clay boards, and flatten them out. We also will put on top of all your clay pieces another board. So you're going to sandwich your pieces together between two boards, because I do know that the clay pieces do tend to want to curl. So lay them out onto a board like this, and then put another board on top of it and allow them to dry. They do dry quickly, and it won't be long before I fire them and getting them ready for the glaze step. So cut out your pieces, figure out what pieces you want. Maybe you want to add some others for interest. Maybe you want to add some of the use various tools or stamps and things like that to create some interest. Also have the pasta letters, so if you want to spell out a word to incorporate into your design as well. Maybe have a little bar of clay and your name or some sort of a special word there with the pasta letters, and you can include that in with your tiles as well. So think of all those little different things that we have available, stamps and texture and things like that that can go into your whole scheme of your design. All right, welcome back to the next step in the process. Now, the clay pieces that we cut out and created, we set out on a board and I bisque fired them. And then you're going to proceed to glaze them with our ceramic glazes. We've got a multitude of colors, some that have kind of a multicolor type to it. And I also have regular solid colors in my glazing or glazes. If for some reason you have, and this is actually a common problem that we have, is some students will have a piece that breaks. And it actually works for the mosaic because these are pieces, and you can just glue them together again, and it kind of fits. Like I broke the tail on this one, and so it just kind of, you glue it down. It also can be mosaiced in just like the other pieces of tiles. So when I did glaze these, I did have some texture that I added to them, some details. And what I did here is I first went over this with a darker colored glaze, just a light coat, and put it in the crevices there. And then I just took a sponge and wiped off the glaze that's on the surface, leaving the darker glaze in the crevices. And then I went over it with the lighter color. These other ones are our multicolored Crystal Tech glazes that have kind of little beads, granular beads in them that melt off into these interesting colors. So once we've gotten to this point and they're glazed and fired, we can proceed to put our mosaic together. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to arrange your pieces kind of approximately where you think you want them to go, and then you're going to use an adhesive glue. We're attaching them to these hardboard pieces. This is 12 by 12, and you'll be gluing them down. I have a special adhesive. It's called a Mosaic tile adhesive that you will apply the glue to the back and glue them down. And these actually, this kind of glue holds it pretty well in place. Once you've got your pieces that you've made where you want them, and I would spend some time arranging them and placing them in the places that you'd like to have them, and then you can go about gluing those down and finding some of the tiles to create and to fill in. I know I have many students kind of filter through and find the colors that they want and kind of stow those aside. Then you can also fill in. I've got other little things here. These little acorns might be really perfect for my mosaic here with the trees. I've got all sorts of various little doodads over there that you can kind of look through and see if they work for you. Consider even something that you might have at home, seashells or anything like that, that might add a little touch, a personal touch to it. All right, so this next step here is to glue down, begin to arrange. When you're gluing tiles down like these here, I would suggest having about of 1/8 of an inch between them, however you arrange them. If you can see on this one here, I have fit them in and I have little spaces in between them. The very last step is we will grout. I will also show you how to cut glass, and that will be in the next segment. All right, another option that you may have is to add some tile, and I have an assortment of tile there in different colored buckets, and they have similar colors. I do recommend, there are sometimes some glass in here, and so I do recommend that you carefully look through it. Maybe use one of the sticks that's in there to look through it, rather than put your hand in there. I certainly don't want you to get cut on a piece of glass or a sharp tile. Now there's going to be some different options there, some tile pieces, some plates and things like that, and I have some tools to utilize. Definitely wear your safety glasses when you're working with this. These are called scorers, And these are breakers, and these are snips. And so each of your tables will have a set of tools of the different types of tools that you can share. Now, in order to break this piece of tile, you need to score it. And you'll kind of know it's working well when you hear that kind of a loud screech sound. Now, you can't just kind of make a square. You have to create one direction and go one direction. This is kind of the way it will break. It won't break, like you can't break a square off, but you can break it in a straight line. Now, once you have made that score line, you're going to line it up to the with this little line that you see on the breaker. Now, with the breaker, it does have a bit of an angle, so when I squeeze on this, it's going to put some pressure on that score line and break it. So hopefully that'll do it for me. There we go. All right. Just took a little bit of work now. Now, if I wanted to break this into another smaller piece, I would just go across like that, creating that score line and break. Smaller pieces are a little bit easier. The same goes for the plates. I do know sometimes with ceramics, they don't always break straight, but you can still use it on plates and things like that. Just kind of accept the color or the shape that you want. You also can use the snips to break off little parts or to shape it into a specific piece. So definitely when you're using the snips, you do need the glasses, the safety glasses. Now, after you've worked with this and you've got pieces of glass and everything, be sure to use a dustpan. Don't use your hand to kind of clean off your surface when it's time to clean up. Use a paper towel that can be thrown away, dustpan. That way we don't have pieces of glass everywhere or onto the floor, things like that. Now, once you've got those pieces, these are items that you can also add to your mosaic. The last step is once you've completed it and you've got it all glued down to your board, is we will apply the grout. Well, we've progressed along and have completed filling the gluing on our pieces, filling it in with some of the smaller fill pieces in the colors that you're wanting. And the last step is once you've glued everything down, it does need to set up, I don't know, 24 hours works best, where everything is adhered nicely and very firmly. And so you do have to wait after you glue, I would say until the next class period, as things do need to set up before you grout. And the last step is the grouting process. Now, I buy the non-sanded grout and I mix it up. I do give kids an option to tint it. I have poured in here a little bit of paint. I use tempera paint and tint it a little bit. You do have to accept that the colors are going to be a little bit pastel because the powder that you put in with the water and the paint is a white, and so it's going to be more of a tint where it's a lighter pastel-y kind of a color. We sometimes will be generous with the paint, but there is kind of a ratio of paint water that you don't want to exceed, as it does get kind of what I've found a little bit crackly if you have too much paint. So we've been able to get a dark gray before or a deep red to some degree. So you have to kind of accept the fact that it's going to be a little bit pastel-y. It will also dry a little lighter than what it is. So you're going to mix this up, and it is a thick consistency, and you're basically it's going to plop it on there. Now, I do have things like a floater that you would use for regular tile projects, but I do find that just small pieces of mat board like this are what will help you to get the grout into the crevices, and that is what your goal is. Initially, you want to just push that grout into the crevices and off of the surfaces. It may be a little bit of a tedious process of creating and pushing that grout into the crevices, and just kind of cleaning them off as best you can. A paper towel kind of works pretty well. What I find is you really do not want this grout to be on the surfaces. So as soon as it's setting up some, take a paper towel and kind of wipe it. At the very, very end, as you've gotten it completely grouted and it's firmed up, we'll take a wet sponge over and clean off the surfaces. But it is very helpful if you initially, while it's a moist consistency, to clean it off of those surfaces as you go along. It will just save you some time and energy. As that firms up, it does become tricky to remove. All right, this is this step, and we will proceed to continue filling this in, and then I'll check back on the finished product in a minute. All right, our next step is removing the grout from the surfaces of your clay pieces. This is a stubborn, tedious process. You really don't want this grout to adhere to the surfaces. It is a little more stubborn as it begins to dry. So go about it. I have found that the little popsicle stick that has been cut off into kind of a squared off area will remove that grout from the surfaces, pushing it into the grooves. I did kind of grout this side first and begin to move over to another side. So I'm starting at this side. It's firmed up just a little bit more. And so the area that's most recent grouted, save that for last, start where you started when you started grouting, and remove as much grout as you can from the surfaces of the tile. Just will make your life a little easier when we go to clean the surface up. Popsicle stick, a toothpick to get into some of the grooves. I also have found that you can build up these side portions, kind of just push that grout into a shape and smooth off the edge there to give yourself a nice squared off smooth side there on every side there. Kind of make sure that that will harden up in a nice even manner. Otherwise, just kind of work on that. Kind of consider how much time you have in class in order to do this step, the grouting and this part. It will take a fair amount of time just to clean up the areas that have grout on it, and do as much as you possibly can to clean that up. And that will be near our final step, is to sponge it off once it's set up a little bit more. All right, we've reached the final step. The grout has set up about an hour or so, and it is ready to be cleaned up. About a half hour or so, when it no longer smudges or moves when you sponge over it. Your last step is just take a bucket and a sponge and rinse off the surfaces of your tiles. Clean them up, remove that excess, keep what is there. Hopefully this is firm enough that it's not smearing the tile grout. If it's still moving grout around, it's probably not ready yet. Otherwise, you can just kind of go over and wash off. Oops, I got one that fell off there, so that will need to be re-glued. Wash off the surfaces of your tiles, clean them up. That's your final step. Once they're cleaned up, you can call it good. Final step, and voila.